the 29th of January 1943, over the gray belly of northern Europe, dawn spread like a thin bruise across the clouds. The air was brutally cold at 20,000 feet, cold enough to stiffen metal and numb fingers through thick gloves. Engine exhausts streamed backward in long white plumes, briefly glowing pink as the rising sun caught them. The sound was constant dozens of engines beating the air in heavy, synchronized rhythm, not sharp and agile, but deep, slow, and relentless. A formation of American B-17 bombers moved east. From a distance, they looked impossibly rigid, as if bolted into the sky. Box formations stretched for miles, each aircraft holding position with mechanical discipline. Frost clung to gun barrels protruding from noses, bellies, waists, and tails. Oxygen masks hissed softly inside unpressurized fuselages. Coffee froze in thermoses. Breath crystallized on wool collars. To German radar operators and fighter controllers, this sight was familiar by now, but still unsettling. The Americans were coming again, in daylight, without apology. German pilots scrambling that morning expected something. They believed they understood. Expected bombers that could be broken. The B-17 Flying Fortress had already earned a reputation by 1943, and it was not a flattering one, at least from the German perspective. Large, slow, and conspicuous, it was not built to evade. Instead, it carried guns. Many guns. Early intelligence estimates credited it with up to 13 machine guns. Later counts reached 16 as modifications increased defensive firepower. German fighter pilots mocked the idea. No bomber, they believed, could truly defend itself against determined fighter attack. Air combat tradition insisted that bombers were prey. Fighters were hunters. Speed, maneuverability, and surprise would always overcome bulk and bravado. This belief had history behind it. In 1940 and 1941, UNESCO bombers, British and German alike, had suffered catastrophic losses when caught by fighters. The Luftwaffe itself had learned this lesson painfully during the Battle of Britain. Bombers that strayed behind, lost formation, or pressed too deep without protection were cut apart. German pilots expected the same outcome from the Americans. What they did not expect was how long it would take. The historical context matters because by early 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a critical inflection point. The Allies believed strategic bombing could cripple German industry, morale, and logistics. The United States, newly committed to this idea, insisted on daylight precision bombing, a doctrine rooted in confidence in technology, formation discipline, and defensive firepower. The B-17 was the embodiment of that doctrine. It was not designed to sneak through enemy airspace. It was designed to force its way through. American planners believed that tightly packed formations of heavily armed bombers could defend themselves. Overlapping fields of fire, creating what one U.S. Air Force manual described as a mobile fortress of mutual protection. The idea was controversial even within Allied ranks. British Bomber Command favored night bombing for a reason. Losses in daylight were expected to be severe. German commanders initially agreed with confidence. Early engagements seemed to confirm German expectations. Fighters attacked from head-on, from above, from below. Bombers burned. Parachutes blossomed. Yet something unexpected began to appear in combat reports. Despite losses, the formations kept coming. And the bombers did not break easily. German pilots who attacked B-17 formations encountered walls of tracer fire thicker than anticipated. Closing speeds were high, reaction times short. Hits accumulated rapidly. Aircraft returned with damaged engines, punctured control surfaces, wounded pilots. Still, the Luftwaffe adapted. New tactics were introduced. Coordinated frontal assaults exploited blind spots. Heavy cannon armament was installed on fighters. Rocket attacks were tested. The expectation was clear. Pressure the bombers long enough, and they would collapse. Then came the missions where some did. The phrase, fell behind, carried deadly meaning in the skies over Europe. bombers that lost formation due to damage, mechanical failure, or wounded crew became isolated. The fortress concept depended on proximity. Guns overlapped only when aircraft stayed together. A single B-17 trailing the formation lost that protection almost instantly. German pilots learned to watch for it. What they expected when a B-17 fell behind was a swift kill. And often, they were right. But not always. Historical records from both sides describe encounters with straggling B-17s that defied logic. Aircraft flying on two engines. Control surfaces shredded. Gunners wounded or dead. Yet still returning fire. Still flying west. German ace Johann Steinhoff later wrote that American bombers possessed a stubbornness that was difficult to account for tactically. Another pilot noted that some B-17s refused to die, even when clearly crippled. The emotional contrast lay in this refusal. German pilots expected fear. They expected disintegration. They expected crews to abandon aircraft once survival seemed unlikely. Instead, they encountered something different. Inside a damaged B-17, the situation was often dire. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Hydraulic systems failed. Blood froze on the floor. Fire threatened fuel tanks. Yet crews were trained to keep flying as long as any possibility remained. Manuals emphasized redundancy. Multiple engines. Backup controls. Alternative bomb release systems. Abundance. Translated into engineering. The recurring symbol of this story was sound the continuous, heavy thrum of four engines. Not fast, not elegant. Just present. German pilots attacking a lone B-17 often described this sound as unsettling. Even when one engine burned, the others carried on. Even when holes riddled the fuselage, the noise did not stop. It contradicted expectations. It suggested a machine designed not for perfection, but for survival. Historical data underscores this philosophy. B-17s were built with significant structural redundancy. Wings could sustain massive damage. Crews could shut down engines mid-flight. Armor protected vital areas. Self-sealing fuel tanks reduced catastrophic fires. German fighters, optimized for speed and agility, were less forgiving. Damage that a bomber absorbed might doom a fighter. Transformation occurred gradually in the German psyche. The flying fortress stopped being merely a target and became an ordeal. Intercepting formations demanded repeated passes through defensive fire. Ammunition was expended rapidly. Pilots faced increasing risk with each approach. When a B-17 fell behind, the expected quick victory sometimes turned into a prolonged struggle. German intelligence summaries from mid-1943 reflect this shift. Reports began noting higher than expected fighter losses during bomber interceptions. Tactical memos emphasized caution when engaging isolated bombers, particularly those still firing effectively. The fortress concept, while imperfect, was working just well enough to impose costs. American losses remained high. Thousands of aircrew would be killed or captured before the war ended. Yet the persistence of the bombing campaign mattered. Each mission forced German fighters into the air. Each interception consumed fuel, pilots, and aircraft that could not be replaced easily. The sound of engines crossing Germany became routine. Factories halted production as sirens wailed. Civilians looked skyward. Flak gunners prepared. Fighters scrambled. And always, the bombers returned again days later. Even when some fell behind, the epilogue of this experience unfolded not in a single battle, but in accumulation. The Flying Fortress did not win the air war alone, but it reshaped expectations. It proved that industrial democracy could absorb loss and continue, that systems built on redundancy could survive punishment that precision could not. When German pilots later reflected on the daylight bombing campaign, many acknowledged that it was not the number of guns that mattered most. It was the certainty that more bombers would follow. More engines. More formations. More sound. The thrum of four engines overhead became the sound of inevitability. and in its sound lay a larger truth about freedom and abundance, that when a society commits its full industrial will to an idea, even machines built to fall behind can keep moving forward, carrying that idea across hostile skies until resistance itself is worn thin. The following missions deepened that realization. Each daylight raid added another layer of evidence that the assumptions guiding German air defense were slipping out of date. The Flying Fortress was not invulnerable, but it was resilient in a way that challenged the Luftwaffe's core expectations about aerial combat. German pilots had been trained to read weakness quickly. A trailing aircraft was supposed to be the clearest signal of vulnerability in the sky. It meant lost mutual support, reduced fire coverage, and a crew already fighting damage or fatigue. Doctrine dictated that such an aircraft should be destroyed swiftly, efficiently, and with minimal risk, yet the B-17 complicated this logic. After action reports from WWII, units in early and mid-1943 began to show a pattern. Pilots noted that isolated American bombers often continued to return fire even after suffering severe structural damage. Tail guns remained active longer than expected. Waist gunners fired until ammunition was exhausted. Nose guns continued to track attackers despite shattered plexiglass. And freezing wind tearing through the fuselage. Sound of the engines persisted. Through it all, this sound mattered more than German. Commanders initially understood. It was not merely mechanical noise. It was a signal that the aircraft was still alive. As long as that sound continued, the bomber remained dangerous. Each engine added redundancy. Each vibration through the airframe told attackers that the aircraft had not yet surrendered its ability to fight back. German pilots found themselves forced into repeated attack passes. Ammunition was expended rapidly, especially cannon shells that were increasingly difficult to replace. Fuel burned away at alarming rates. The longer an engagement lasted, the greater the risk of running out of time before reaching home airfields. This altered the emotional calculus of interception. What? German pilots expected a brief. Decisive engagement often turned into a prolonged contest of endurance. The bomber, slower and less agile, should have been at a disadvantage. Instead, its persistence inverted the relationship. The fighter, designed for speed and efficiency, became the one under pressure to disengage. Historical records reveal how this pressure accumulated. Law statistics show that German fighter attrition during bomber interception missions rose steadily through 1943, not always dramatically in a single battle, but consistently enough to strain training pipelines and maintenance capacity. American losses were heavy as well. But replacement rates favored the United States. Factories in Seattle, Long Beach, and Wichita produced B-17s in numbers that defied earlier wartime precedent. Crews were trained continuously. Aircraft damaged beyond immediate repair were written off and replaced without halting the campaign. Abundance expressed itself not as extravagance, but as continuity. The Flying Fortress that fell behind on one mission was often replaced by two more on the next. German pilots noticed this pattern. Interceptions that once felt decisive began to feel futile, no matter how many bombers were destroyed. More appeared days later, following similar routes, attacking similar targets. The sound of engines crossing German airspace became routine, almost rhythmic. This rhythm wore on morale. Luftwaffe pilots, many of whom had joined the service expecting decisive engagements and clear victories, now faced an opponent that seemed immune to discouragement. Bombers returned despite losses. Crews flew again after seeing comrades shot down. Factories repaired damage and resumed production. The fortress concept had extended beyond the aircraft itself. It had become systemic. When B-17s fell behind, their fate was still often grim. Many were destroyed. Many crews did not return. But even these losses carried meaning. Each bomber that forced German fighters into extended engagements drained resources that could not be replaced easily. Each interception pulled pilots away from training and rest. Each battle chipped away at the Luftwaffe's capacity to maintain control of the skies. The transformation was subtle but decisive. German air defense gradually shifted from confident interception to reactive containment. The goal became not destruction of the bombing force, but mitigation of damage. This was a strategic retreat in everything, but named out by late 1943. The arrival of long-range Allied fighter escorts would further tilt the balance. But even before that shift, the Flying Fortress had already accomplished something profound. It had demonstrated that technological confidence, backed by industrial scale, could challenge even the most skilled opposition. The recurring sound of 4 engines overhead came to symbolize this reality. It was the sound of persistence over precision, of endurance over elegance, of a system designed to absorb loss and continue. In the epilogue of this phase of the air war, German pilots would later reflect not on individual aircraft or gunners, but on the feeling of inevitability, the sense that no matter how well they fought, the bombers would keep coming. That falling behind did not always mean surrender, that a damaged machine could still carry purpose across hostile skies, and in that understanding lay a larger truth about freedom and abundance, that when a society commits itself fully, it can build machines that carry its values not through perfection, but through persistence, through the steady, unrelenting sound of engines that refuse to stop.